So there is always that danger of making consciousness sound too objective, because remember, consciousness is both subject and object, because part of consciousness, conscious identity is what a human being is. We identify and we think that we are conscious, right? We all talk like we are conscious. That identification of consciousness with us happens. That is called the subject. So the world has this dual pole, subject and object, and consciousness is both. It becomes both. So that is the trick that we have to understand, and glibly saying consciousness is a unified field may not be as clear to point the subject-object aspect of consciousness.
But I guess the cool thing for people that have, again, maybe whether it be philosophically or spiritually, have been talking for years, that we are all one, and
yes.
You know that always sounded like an abstract, you know, hippie way of describing the universe in what some people would say a naive way of looking at things, because clearly you're not acknowledging the evidence. Clearly we're not all one. You know, you are you, I'm me, and there's matter that shows that there's separateness. And I guess with this work that you're doing right now would support that we are all one.
Yeah, then what one has to recognize again is that there is a bit of subtlety. We are all one at one level of consciousness, in a very non-ordinary state of consciousness, but in our ordinary state of consciousness, we certainly seem to be separate, and we are separate in a very real sense. So we are both one and not one, separate. We are both unified at that non-ordinary cosmic state of consciousness, but in our ordinary state of consciousness we become very separate. Both statements are correct, and this is where subtleties come in. But these subtleties are subtleties of experience. These subtleties are not subtleties of sophistication, of mathematics or language or anything like that. These are aspects of our experience. Anyone has felt unity. Every once in a while we go to a forest, we look at a sunset, we go on the ocean, and we feel that unity. That miraculous nature of everything. But on the other hand, in our ordinary life, you know, we feel very separate. So both are true in our experience.
You said something very interesting to me earlier, which was, you know, that we got so caught up in our five senses that we've almost completely disregarded the most important senses and relegated them to the space of the kooky, again, the naive, you know, the intangible, let's say, and those things are feeling and intuition and thinking. And those things, because we got so caught up, obviously, in quantifying everything in the scientific world, measurement being the most important, we kind of discarded things that essentially, at least at the time, we didn't think could be measured. And what we're finding out now is it's those tools, those senses, if you will, that are perhaps the most important in terms of, quote unquote, measuring consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. So the point is that we should always recognize that this idea of quantitative measurement is incomplete. We have to have certain things are only subject to qualitative measurement. The biggest problem with many scientists is that they think that objectivity is such a great idea that it must be applied everywhere. Yeah. But only way you can apply objectivity everywhere is to completely ignore the importance of subjective experience. But certain experiences are subjective, and that is the important thing about being a human being. That we have subjective experiences, we have qualitative experiences, and those things you cannot quantitatively measure. You can only qualitatively measure. This idea, quantum physics is very happy with. In quantum physics, there is both quality and quantity, because there is possibilities and then there is actuality.
And so quantum physics, I was just going to say, and there's that bridge again that's being, you know, not just built but fortified between science and spirituality, because interestingly to me is that, you know, the ultimate reliance of science before and still is measurement. And yet what we're really saying, because when we're talking about things like infinity, there simply aren't tools. And as we even find as we drill deeper into the quantum world, the better tools we develop, whether on a macro level like the Hubble telescope or a micro level, the further we as the observer can see, the more will show itself. So that obviously suggests some sort of infinity. And at the end of the day, without the proper ability to measure that, which is, it's almost impossible to get our heads around, let alone measure it, it brings us back to a very spiritual word that we've heard many times, faith. That this field almost requires returning to a faith, that knowing that we have inside us.
Yeah. And also recognize that as we are developing tools, this is a very good idea. Our tools get refined enough that we can measure that which was previously considered only unmeasurable. For example, feelings have traditionally been considered unmeasurable, but now we are measuring it. We are measuring it by realizing that feelings are correlated with organs, and therefore a malfunction of feeling, namely if I have negative feelings, then that will lead to a functional change in organs like the skin. And we can make measurements of the electromagnetics of the skin, and that measurement will show us that there is something wrong with the feeling of this person. And that kind of photography is already available. It's called Carlian photography.
Isn't that wild that isn't on the 6 o'clock news?
I know.
You know what I mean? Like some of these things that I've found through my own personal research that, again, like you said, we can measure love. We can measure feelings. We actually have the ability not just to measure the wave, but like you said, photograph these things. Yet you talk to 1,000 people, maybe one person is aware of this, and here we are. And one of the things that always struck me, and again, I have the opportunity to talk to a scientist. When we started to understand placebos, and I remember when the first time somebody explained placebos to me, I was like, I was kind of, okay, wait a sec. You're telling me that we're aware in the medical establishment, in the scientific establishment, that people can be told they're taking some medicine, put a sugar pill in their mouths, and it actually heal a part of them because their belief is so strong. And you're telling me we're aware of that, but we're not devoting like 90% of the scientific resources to figuring out the rest of that.
Or how to better placebo. So indeed, placebo is the greatest proof of the causal efficacy of the mind and consciousness. But scientists are very aware of it. Recent studies are showing that much of the healing that we get from much of the pharmaceutical drugs is because of a placebo effect, not because of the drugs. So now we understand how important it is to keep the patient happy in the hospital or elsewhere. And those things will directly bring us into an integrative science that are showing the importance of happiness. Why happiness is important? Because in happiness we are already whole, and even that temporary wholeness can lead to healing. So as when medical costs skyrocket, and it will skyrocket, everybody knows that, because the present polarization will prevent any permanent solution of the medicine problem. And then we have to ask these questions. Can we bring the cost down? Can we do without these pharmaceuticals? And then everybody will say, oh, we already know. It's placebo. So let's keep the patient happy, and that will have a better effect than all these pharmaceutical drugs, which have always disastrous side effects.
And as we were talking about earlier, though, unfortunately, when there's benefits to maintaining the status quo, whether you're the pharmaceutical industry or the medical industry, they're not going to be rushing to find solutions like happiness being the ultimate healing effect. But that's a conversation for another day. I did want to get to non-locality before we take a break and get to really getting into what the Center for Quantum Activism is all about. As a young man who was, in the scientific field for a long time, it was really in the 80s that these sort of laboratory conditioned tested studies that essentially introduced what was purely theoretical before, which was, a photon could be in two places at once, be stimulated on one side, 7 miles away, and feel it simultaneously, immediately at the same time, which completely throws everything outside of everything from the classical physical world on its ear. When you started to, first of all, see those studies being done and understand that, what did that feel like for you?
Well, I mean, that was a liberating experience for me as well, because at that time, 1982, when Alan Aspect first proved this non-local correlation between two photons, two quanta of light, I was quite stuck with scientific materialism myself because I could not see any way out. But when the experiment came out, then I knew that there has to be a way out, because the experiment was telling me that scientific materialism is just wrong. You have to break free from it. And I did. Within 3 years, the idea came that consciousness is the ground of being, solves not only quantum physics, but solves all the paradoxes. Mind you, all the paradoxes and anomalous data of current day science. And it's just that, as you said, it does not appear on the 6 o'clock news, but it's really amazing how many problems exist in current science and how many problems can be solved immediately as soon as you recognize that the metaphysics is wrong.
And which ultimately introduced or pushed you towards coining a term, monistic idealism versus the dualistic idealism that we were talking about before. And again, allow me to maybe oversimplify, but at the end of the day, that monistic idealism incorporates some sort of incredible interconnectedness to it.
Yes, and that is what we are calling quantum non-locality, because quantum physics has it built into it. In quantum physics, it's a built-in part of the metaphysics that there is a place in which we are all connected, and that interconnectedness is consciousness. That is consciousness. That interconnected medium, which is a non-physical and outside of space and time, and everything in space and time, transcendent and immanent, everything that there ever was, there ever will be, there ever is, that is consciousness.
And that's something that's, I think a lot of people are waking up to, and when they hear this information, even if people don't fully understand it, there's something in them, that intuition that you're talking about, that goes off. And because something happens to us when we connect to pure truth. I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but it's a beautiful feeling when you connect with pure truth. And it's also great when people like yourself aren't just delivering information and insights and knowledge, that you're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And that's what the Center for Quantum Activism is all about. And we're going to get into that with Dr. Amit Goswami after the break. You are watching the One Network.
In quantum physics, objects are not determined things. Objects are possibilities. Possibilities of what? Possibilities for consciousness to choose from. Can God be talked about in terms of science, which always analyzes, reduces things to other things? God is supposed to be this whole thing, whole enchilada? How can we ever talk about God in scientific terms, let alone try to find scientific evidence for God? This is a very good question. We have literally managed to train whole generation of kids on the idea that everything is material. This evolutionary step is completely essential for even basic survivability of human beings on this planet. There is very definitive scientific evidence for the existence of God. And then my question to you, so what are you doing about it? Now you can call it God if you like. You don't have to. It's objective. It's objective and it's scientific.